Don't sit there. The voice was cold, practiced, the kind that didn't expect to be questioned. The woman froze, her hand still gripping the strap of her worn leather bag. Eyes glassy, cheeks flushed from holding back something too heavy to name. Around her, the airport lounge buzzed with quiet judgment, polished shoes crossing marble floors, soft conversations humming under fluorescent lights. But no one stepped closer. No one offered space. No one offered grace. Ethan Cole stood a few feet away, his daughter's small backpack slung over one shoulder, his own boots scuffed from years of honest work, watching the moment stretch thin like glass about to crack. "Sir, this area is for premium guests only," the staff member added, sharper this time, gesturing subtly for the woman to move along as if she were something misplaced. Ethan didn't look at the staff. He didn't look at the crowd. He simply walked forward, set his worn duffel down beside the empty seat next to her, and sat. The movement was quiet, almost invisible, but it cut through the room like truth. "Then I guess I belong here too," he said, voice calm, steady, not loud enough to challenge, but strong enough to remain. A few heads turned, a few brows tightened, but no one spoke. The woman glanced at him, confused, almost defensive, like kindness was a language she hadn't heard in years. "You don't have to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to betray the storm underneath. Ethan shrugged slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes forward. "Yeah," he said softly, "I do." The overhead announcement crackled, calling a delayed flight, but neither of them moved. Seconds passed, then minutes. The noise of the lounge faded into something distant, like the world had stepped back to watch. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes after holding everything in for far too long. "I'm not okay," she admitted, barely audible. Ethan nodded once, not turning, not pushing. "Good," he replied. "Means you're still human." That caught her off guard. A small, broken laugh slipped through her tears before she could stop it. The tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction, like something inside her had been given permission to exist. Ethan reached into his bag, pulled out a folded napkin and a small paper cup of coffee he'd just bought for $3.50, and placed them gently on the seat between them. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm." She stared at the cup, then at him, studying the lines in his face, the quiet in his posture, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from weakness but from surviving something you never talk about. "Why would you help me?" she asked after a long pause. Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes still on the runway lights flickering beyond the glass. "Because no one sat with me," he said, voice lower now, steadier, "when I needed it most." And just like that, something shifted, not in the room, not in the noise, but in the space between two strangers who suddenly didn't feel so alone. The coffee sat untouched for a moment, steam curling softly into the cold airport air, as if it carried something more than warmth, something fragile and human that neither of them wanted to disturb too quickly. And Ethan did not rush it, he never did, because he had learned the hard way that some moments needed silence more than solutions. While across from them a businessman adjusted his watch and looked away, and a young couple whispered behind their phones, and still no one came closer, no. One interrupted, as if an invisible line had been drawn around the two of them, and whatever truth was unfolding there. "What happened to you?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now. Not defensive anymore, but searching, and Ethan let out a slow breath, his eyes tracing the runway lights blinking in steady rhythm beyond the glass. "Life," he said simply, then paused, then added, "Same as everyone, just a little louder." She studied him again, the worn fabric of his jacket, the calluses on his hands, the kind of details people with perfect lives never noticed, and something in her expression softened. "You have a family?" she asked, and this time Ethan nodded without hesitation. "A daughter," he said, and for the first time there was a shift in his voice, something warmer, something steadier. "She is 8, loves pancakes on Saturday mornings, and thinks every plane she sees is going somewhere magical." The woman's lips curved slightly at that. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like one. "That sounds nice," she said, and there was a quiet ache behind her words, like she was remembering something she never quite had. Ethan glanced at her then, just briefly, not staring, just enough to acknowledge her presence without crowding it. "It is," he said, but it took a long time to feel that way. She looked down at her hands, fingers tightening slightly around the paper cup. "I had everything," she whispered almost to herself. "Or at least that is what everyone thinks." Ethan did not interrupt. He just listened, the way people rarely do anymore. "And she continued, the right job, the right people, the right life, but none of it felt real." Her voice cracked just enough to break through whatever composure she had been holding on to. "And today I realized I do not even know who I am without all of it." The words hung there, heavy but honest. And for a moment the world outside seemed to pause again, planes taxiing slowly, announcements echoing faintly, footsteps soft against polished floors. And Ethan nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That happens." She looked at him, surprised by how easily he accepted something she had been fighting for so long. "And what did you do?" she asked. And this time Ethan leaned back slightly, folding his hands together, his voice calm but grounded in something deeper. "I stopped trying to be who everyone expected me to be," he said, "and started showing up for the one person who needed me anyway." She blinked, processing that, her breath steadying her, shoulders lowering just a fraction more. And for the first time since she had sat down, she did not look like someone being pushed out of a place she did not belong, but someone beginning to realize she might still have somewhere to stand. And Ethan picked up his coffee, took a small sip, then added softly, "You do not have to figure everything out today." And something in that simple sentence settled into the space between them, quiet, steady, real, like a promise neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. The announcement overhead shifted again. Another delay, another gate change, voices echoing through the terminal like distant waves. But neither of them moved, as if time had quietly decided to leave them alone for a little while longer. And the woman finally wrapped her hands around the coffee, feeling its warmth sink into her fingers like something grounding, something real. "I used to think being strong meant never breaking," she said, her voice steadier now, but still carrying the weight of everything she had been holding in. "Like if I could just keep going, keep performing, keep winning, then none of it would catch up to me." Ethan listened without interrupting, his posture relaxed, his presence steady in a way that did not demand attention but earned trust. "And did it work?" he asked gently, and she let out a quiet breath that almost turned into a laugh. "No," she admitted, shaking her head slightly. "It just made everything feel emptier." A group of passengers rolled their suitcases past them, wheels clicking rhythmically against the floor, but the sound faded quickly, swallowed by the stillness between them. "I walked away today," she continued, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the planes, beyond the noise, from all of it, the meetings, the expectations, the people who only knew me when I was useful. Ethan nodded once, slowly, as if he understood more than she expected. "That takes more strength than staying," he said, and she turned to him, surprised again, because that was not what she had been telling herself, not what anyone had ever told her. "It does not feel like strength," she replied, her voice quieter now. "It feels like I lost everything." Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his voice calm but firm in a way that carried weight without pressure. "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what actually matters." She held his gaze for a second longer this time, searching for doubt, for judgment, for anything that would make his words easier to dismiss. But there was none, just quiet certainty, and that unsettled her in a different way. "You talk like you have been through it," she said, and Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unchanged, but his eyes carrying something deeper now, something older. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," he said, his voice steady, not fragile, not distant, just honest. "One day everything was normal. The next day nothing made sense." She inhaled slowly, the weight of that settling in her chest. "I am sorry," she said softly, and he acknowledged it with a slight tilt of his head. "For a while, I thought I could just keep moving, keep working, keep pretending I was fine," he continued, his gaze drifting briefly toward the runway lights again. "But my daughter, she did not need me to be strong like that. She just needed me to be there." The woman's grip on the coffee cup loosened, her shoulders lowering even more as if something inside her was finally allowed to rest. "So what changed?" she asked. And Ethan's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not wide, not dramatic, just real. "I stopped trying to fix everything," he said, and started showing up one day at a time. The words settled between them, simple but heavy with meaning. And for the first time since they had met, the woman's eyes were no longer searching for escape. They were present, grounded, and something in her expression shifted again, not completely healed, not completely certain, but different, like the beginning of something quieter, something stronger. And as another announcement echoed through the terminal, calling for boarding at a distant gate, she did not stand, she did not rush, she just sat there beside a man who had nothing to offer but truth, and somehow that felt like more than enough. The boarding call echoed again, clearer this time, a calm voice announcing final boarding for a flight that neither of them seemed ready to take, and the woman glanced up at the screen, then back at Ethan, hesitation flickering across her face like a question she was not sure how to ask. "Do you ever feel like, if you stand up, everything just comes rushing back?" she said quietly, and Ethan let out a small breath, nodding once as if he had been there more times than he could count. "Yeah," he replied. "That is usually how it works." She gave a faint, almost reluctant smile at that, her fingers tracing the rim of the empty cup now resting in her lap. "I do not think I am ready for that yet," she admitted, and Ethan leaned back slightly, his tone calm, steady, never pushing. "Then do not rush it," he said. "Planes leave every day, but moments like this, they do not." She looked at him more fully now, really looked this time, not just at the surface, but at the quiet strength underneath. And something in her expression softened even further, like the last layer of resistance was slowly giving way. "You talk like none of this scares you," she said, and Ethan shook his head gently, a subtle motion but honest. "It does," he replied. "I just learned that being scared does not mean you stop. It just means you take smaller steps." The words settled into her, not loud, not dramatic, just real, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting that sink in. The hum of the airport fading again into something distant, something manageable. "What if I go back and nothing changes?" she asked after a pause, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than before, and Ethan considered that for a second, not rushing to answer, not filling the silence too quickly. "Then you will know you tried," he said finally. "And sometimes that is the only way forward." She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried both fear and something close to hope, and when she opened her eyes again, they were clearer, not perfect, not healed, but steadier. "You make it sound simple," she said, and Ethan gave a small, knowing smile. "It is simple," he replied. "It is just not easy." That drew a real smile from her this time, small but undeniable, and it changed something in the air between them, something lighter, something warmer, like the beginning of sunlight after a long storm. And across the lounge a few people were watching now, not openly, but enough to notice that something quiet and meaningful was happening in a place usually too busy for moments like that. "I never even asked your name," she said suddenly, as if realizing how strange and yet how natural this connection had been, and Ethan glanced at her, then back ahead. "Ethan," he said simply, and she repeated it softly, almost testing the weight of it. "Ethan." Then after a brief pause, she added, "I am," but the word stopped there, caught between who she was and who she was trying to become, and she shook her head slightly, a faint smile returning. "I am still figuring that part out." Ethan nodded, not needing more, not asking for more, because some answers were not meant to be rushed, and the final boarding call came again, louder now, more urgent, and this time she looked at the gate, then back at him, and something in her posture had changed, not completely certain, not completely fearless, but ready enough to stand. And as she slowly rose from the seat, she paused for just a second longer, looking down at him with a quiet gratitude that did not need words to be understood, because sometimes the most important things are not said, they're simply felt, and in that moment, the noise of the world returned, but it no longer felt overwhelming, just part of a journey that was finally beginning again. She did not walk away immediately, even after standing. even after the final boarding call echoed one last time through the terminal, because something about leaving felt heavier now than when she first arrived, and Ethan remained seated, not watching her leave, not asking her to stay, just present in the same quiet way he had been from the beginning, giving her the space to choose. "Ethan," she said softly, and he looked up, meeting her eyes without expectation, without urgency. "Thank you," she continued, her voice steadier now, carrying something new, something grounded. "You did not try to fix me. You did not ask for anything. You just stayed." Ethan gave a small nod, the kind that did not need recognition. "Sometimes that is enough," he replied, and for a moment neither of them moved, the noise of the airport returning around them in full, rolling suitcases, distant announcements, the low hum of conversations blending together. But the space between them still felt separate, still felt real. "I wish more people understood that," she said, almost to herself, and Ethan shrugged lightly. "They will," he said, "just not always when we expect it." She let out a soft breath, then glanced toward the gate again, the line of passengers thinning as the last few boarded, and this time she took a step forward, then another, but after only a few feet she stopped, turning back once more as if something inside her had not quite finished speaking. "You said you have a daughter," she said, and Ethan nodded, a faint smile touching his expression. "Yeah," he replied. "Her name is Lily." The name lingered in the air for a second, simple but meaningful, and the woman smiled gently. "She is lucky," she said, and Ethan shook his head slightly. "No," he answered, his voice soft but certain. "I am." That made her pause again, taking in the weight of that perspective, the kind that did not come from success or status, but from something deeper, something earned. And for a moment it seemed like she might say more, like there were still words waiting just beneath the surface, but instead she nodded once, holding his gaze just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, something that did not need explanation. Then she turned and walked toward the gate, her steps still careful, still measured, but no longer uncertain. And Ethan watched her go only after she had already started moving, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet acknowledgement, like witnessing someone take their first real step forward after standing still for too long. And as she disappeared into the boarding line, blending into the crowd once more, the space she left behind felt different, not empty, but changed, like something important had passed through it and left a trace. And Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly, the tension he had not realized he was holding easing just a little, because sometimes helping someone else stand reminded you that you were still standing too. And a few minutes later, as the gate agent called out that boarding was complete and the doors were closing, Ethan reached down for his bag, adjusting the strap over his shoulder, ready to move on with his own journey, unaware that the quiet moment he had just shared would not stay small, would not stay hidden, and that somewhere beyond the runway, lights and departure screens, the woman he had sat beside was stepping back into a world that would soon remember exactly who she was. And when it did, it would not forget the man who treated her like she was simply human. The plane had already taken off by the time Ethan found his seat, the soft hum of the engines steady beneath his feet as clouds stretched wide outside the window, like a quiet promise of distance. And yet his mind did not follow the flight path. It stayed behind, replaying a moment that had felt small, but carried a weight he could not quite explain, the way her voice shifted when she said she was not okay, the way she stayed just a little longer than she planned, the way something in her eyes changed before she walked away, and Ethan leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a second, not to sleep, but to settle, because life had taught him that not every moment needed to be understood right away, some just needed to be felt. And a few rows ahead a child laughed, the sound light and unfiltered, reminding him of Lily, of pancake mornings and quiet evenings, of the life he had rebuilt piece by piece, not perfectly, but honestly, and somewhere between that thought and the steady rhythm of the flight, he let go of the question that lingered, who she was, where she was going, what would happen next, because it was not his to carry. And when the plane landed hours later, the world returned quickly, baggage claims, announcements, the shuffle of people moving toward their next destination, and Ethan stepped into it without hesitation, Just another man with a worn bag and a quiet life waiting for him at home, but across the country. In a private terminal far from crowded gates and fluorescent lights, the same woman stepped off. A different plane, one that had been held just long enough for her to arrive, and the moment she appeared, everything changed. Assistants moved quickly, voices lowered, doors opened before she reached them, and yet she paused for just a second at the top of the stairs, her eyes scanning the horizon not for direction, but for something she had not felt in a long time, something she had found in the most unexpected place. A quiet seat in a crowded airport beside a man who did not need to know her, named to treat her like she mattered. And as she walked forward, the world fell back into its familiar rhythm around her, schedules, expectations, decisions waiting to be made. But something inside her no longer moved at that same pace. It was steadier now, quieter, grounded in a way that power had never given her. And when one of her assistants approached with a tablet, listing meetings and urgent matters that could not wait, she listened, nodded, then said calmly, "Reschedule the morning." And the assistant blinked, surprised but obedient, because that was not something she usually did, not something she allowed. And as the car door opened and she stepped inside, the city lights reflecting off glass and steel around her, she leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes just for a moment. And in that stillness, one memory rose above all the others. Not a boardroom, not a deal, not a victory, but a simple voice beside her saying, "You do not have to figure everything out today." And for the first time in years, she believed it. Not because it solved everything, but because it gave her something better, permission to begin again, quietly, without needing the world to understand, and somewhere miles away. Ethan unlocked his front door, greeted by the familiar creak of the hinges and the soft light of a home that was not perfect but real. And as he set his bag down and called out for Lily, he had no idea that the quiet moment he had shared was already beginning to echo far beyond what he could see, moving through a world that was finally ready to listen. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of soft light that slipped through the kitchen window and settled gently across the worn wooden table, and Ethan stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same steady rhythm he had built his life around. Simple, consistent, real, while Lily sat nearby, swinging her legs from her chair, humming to herself as she traced little drawings on a napkin. "Did your trip go okay, Daddy?" she asked, looking up with bright, curious eyes, and Ethan smiled, setting a pancake onto her plate. "Yeah," he said. "It was different." She tilted her head slightly, sensing there was more behind that answer. But she did not press, because children often understand more about quiet than adults do. And as they ate together, the world outside felt distant, manageable, like it always did in moments like this. But miles away, in a high-rise office overlooking a skyline of glass and steel, the woman stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection faint against the morning light. And for once she was not rushing, not reacting, not performing. She was still, holding a tablet in her hand that displayed numbers, schedules, expectations, everything that had once defined her, and yet none of it felt as loud as it used to. "Your 9 o'clock meeting is ready," her assistant said gently from behind, careful, respectful, and she nodded without turning, her voice calm but different now. "Give me 5 minutes," she replied, and the assistant hesitated for just a second before stepping back, sensing the shift without fully understanding it. And when the room fell quiet again, she closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to center, to remember, and the memory came easily, not forced, not distant, just present. A man sitting beside her with no reason to stay and no intention to leave, and she exhaled slowly, opening her eyes with a clarity she had not felt in years. And when she finally turned and walked toward the conference room, something in her posture had changed, not less powerful, but more grounded, less driven by expectation and more by choice. And as she entered, conversations paused, attention shifted, because her presence always carried weight. But this time there was something else, something quieter, something steadier that no one could quite name. "Let us begin," she said, her voice even, composed, but without the edge it once held. And as the meeting unfolded, she listened more than she spoke, questioned more than she commanded. And when a proposal crossed her desk that would have once been approved without hesitation, she paused, considering not just the numbers, but the impact, the people, the unseen weight behind the decision, and that pause alone changed the direction of the room. Because leadership, real leadership, does not always come from speaking first. Sometimes it comes from choosing when to wait. And later that day, as news screens lit up across the building with a live interview announcement, her name appeared in bold letters, drawing attention the way it always did. But this time, as cameras prepared and microphones adjusted, she did not step forward immediately. She stood just off to the side, watching, thinking, and somewhere in that moment, she made a decision that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with truth. And when she finally walked into the frame, the room fell quiet. Not because she demanded it, but because something in her presence asked for it. And far away, Ethan sat on a worn couch with Lily beside him, the television flickering softly in the background, unaware that the same moment he had already let go of was about to return in a way neither of them could have imagined. Because sometimes the smallest acts do not stay small. They grow, they travel, and when they come back, they carry more than anyone expects. The television flickered softly in Ethan's living room, the glow casting warm light across the worn couch as Lily curled up beside him, her small hand resting against his arm while a news anchor's voice filled the quiet space, steady, professional, ordinary, until it was not, because the screen shifted, the headline changed, and suddenly the room felt different without anyone saying why. Today, Olivia Hart, the CEO of Hart Global Airlines, made an unexpected statement. The anchor began, and Ethan barely reacted at first, his attention still half on Lily, half on the day winding down, until the camera cut to her, standing behind a podium, composed, poised, unmistakable, and everything inside him stilled, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to notice, just enough to remember, the airport, the seat, the quiet conversation that had seemed like nothing more than a moment passing through time. And Lily shifted slightly, looking up at the screen with curiosity. "She looks important," she said. And Ethan nodded faintly, his eyes still fixed forward. "Yeah," he replied softly. "I think she is," but on the screen, Olivia did not begin with numbers or announcements or polished corporate language. She paused, her gaze steady, her presence calm in a way that held the room without demanding it. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried something different, something quieter but stronger. "A few days ago," she said, "I sat in an airport, and for the first time in a long time, I was not a CEO. I was not a leader. I was just someone who felt lost." The room behind her remained silent, cameras focused, reporters waiting, but her words did not rush to meet their expectations. They moved at their own pace, deliberate, grounded. And in that moment, she continued, "Someone sat beside me, not because they knew who I was, not because they wanted anything, but because they chose to stay." Ethan's breath slowed, almost imperceptibly, as the memory aligned with the image in front of him. The same eyes, the same quiet strength, now standing in a world that suddenly felt much larger than he had imagined. And Lily leaned closer, sensing the shift in him even if she did not understand it yet. "What is she talking about?" she whispered, and Ethan did not answer right away, because something in his chest had tightened, not with fear, not with pride, but with recognition. "That moment changed me," Olivia said on the screen, her voice unwavering. "Not because it solved anything, but because it reminded me that dignity does not come from titles. It comes from how we treat each other when nothing is being asked in return." The words settled into the room, into the screen, into every quiet space listening, and Ethan sat there still grounded, not reaching for attention, not expecting anything, because that was never why he stayed. And as the camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the sincerity in her expression, she added one more sentence, softer this time, but carrying more weight than anything before it. "And wherever you are, thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." And the room fell silent, not forced, not scripted, just real. And in that silence, Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand resting gently over Lily's, as the world around him kept moving. But something inside that moment remained still, steady, and undeniable. The room stayed quiet long after the broadcast ended. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some moments asked for stillness instead of words, and Ethan sat there with his hand resting over Lily's, his eyes still on the screen, even as it shifted back to regular programming. The weight of what had just happened settling slowly, naturally, like something finding its place rather than forcing it. "Was she talking about you?" Lily asked softly, her voice curious but gentle, and Ethan let out a small breath, not surprised by the question, just thoughtful about the answer. "Yeah," he said simply, not with pride, not with hesitation, just truth, and Lily looked at him a little differently then, not in awe, not in confusion, but in quiet understanding, the kind that children carry without needing explanation. "You just sat with her," she said, almost as if confirming something important, and Ethan nodded, his expression calm. "That is all," he replied, and she smiled a small, certain smile. "That is a lot," she said, and he could not help but smile back at that, because sometimes the simplest things carry the most meaning when seen clearly. And across the country, in a room filled with people who were used to noise, used to movement, used to constant direction, Olivia stood alone for a moment after the camera shut off, the silence around her different. Now, not empty, not pressured, but grounded, like something had finally aligned inside her, and one of her advisors stepped forward carefully, unsure how to break the quiet. "That was not planned," he said, his tone measured, and she turned slightly, her expression steady. "No," she replied. "It was not," and there was no apology in her voice, no need to justify, because for the first time in a long time, she was not speaking for expectation. She was speaking from something real, and that changed everything. "Do you want us to find him?" the advisor asked after a pause, already thinking ahead, already moving toward solutions. But Olivia shook her head gently, a small motion but certain. "No," she said, "he did not help me to be found." And the advisor hesitated, then nodded, understanding more from her tone than her words, because respect sometimes means leaving something untouched. And as the room slowly filled again with quiet activity, she stepped back toward the window, looking out over the city that once defined her, but now felt like just one part of something larger, something more human. And far away, in a small living room with soft light and familiar warmth, Ethan stood and turned off the television, the screen fading to black as the moment settled into memory. Not something to chase, not something to hold on to too tightly, just something that happened, something that mattered. And as he walked Lily to bed, tucking her in the way he always did, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and said, You did something good today." And Ethan paused for a second, not because he needed to think, but because he felt it deeply, quietly. "We all can," he said, his voice soft but certain. And when he turned off the light and stepped out into the hallway, the house fell into its usual calm, the kind that come from a life built on small, steady choices. And somewhere beyond the noise of cities and headlines and expectations, two lives continued forward, not connected by names or status or recognition, but by something simpler, something stronger, the quiet understanding that dignity does not need attention to exist. It only needs someone willing to show up, sit down, and stay. And in that truth, the world did not need to change all at once. It only needed moments like that to remind it how.